My name's Spencer Stewart, and I'm the chair of the Alcuin Society. Before we get started, I'm seeing some new names, so I thought I'd just take a chance to talk about the society itself before we move on to Sam Archibald's introduction and then Rod McDonald's talk this evening. The Alcuin Society, it was founded in 1965, and it's the only nonprofit organization in Canada dedicated to the entire range of interests connected to books, book arts, and reading. And we achieve this through a number of different initiatives that the Society does. The first is through our journal, Amphora, which is published 3 times a year and is offered to members. Then also through lectures and events such as the one this evening. We try and do as many virtual events as we can, as well as in-person lectures. We also do it through the Alcuin Book Design Awards, which is an annual event. We will be doing the judging in March this year, and a catalog will be produced afterwards and made available. And also connected to that is the Robert R. Reed Award, which we do on an occasional basis to recognize practitioners within Canada around the book arts. Just returning back to the Alcuin Design Awards a little bit, after we do the judging, not only do we have a catalog, we also do exhibitions, and those are national as well as international. So the international exhibitions, you can see them at the Frankfurt and Leipzig book fairs. That's where the winners of the Alcuin Awards go on to represent Canada in those forums. And then also through the Canadian Embassy in Tokyo. Before we get underway today, I want to also thank Gina Page, the programs chair for the Alcuin Society. Without her, we would not be able to put together all these programs and putting together the schedule. And at the end of the talk tonight, I'll talk about some events that we have coming up. Again, this is an entirely volunteer-run organization, and so if you're not a member, we strongly encourage you to visit our site and consider becoming a member this evening, or in the next couple of days. We certainly have links and things available through our various platforms. So with that, I will hand it over first to Sam, and then we will move on to Rod. Again, thank you all very much for coming, and just shift this over. Over to you, Sam.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Spencer. Hello, everybody. Welcome. So I am here to introduce the CTA and a little bit of Rod. I'm going to, I could read what's on our website at canadiantypography.ca word for word, but if you excuse me, I'm going to assume that you didn't just stumble into this Zoom call. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about why the ICA is important to me and why I feel that this is a really momentous moment in Canadian typography history. So when I was a student of Rod's in the mid-2000s, it was said that to be hireable, you had to be good at type. And I could keep my job if I was good at type, was how I heard that. We read about European movements and radical American typography of the 90s, but little was taught about Canadian typography. I remember when I first saw Cartier, it was like, that's it, that's Canadian typography. But after 14 years in the industry, I can say that understanding and knowing how to set suitable type is a skill that still remains vital to our professional industries. And our industries talk a lot about how technology or ways of working are dead, or that something new is going to replace all of us, and that will likely be AI. But none of that really matters, in the sense that I think it all comes down to how well we communicate. So what's so exciting about this moment is that the next generation is going to have some really great resources and tools with the CTA, the Canadian Typography Archives. I see the archives as a vessel, much like an excellent body typeface. They can tell stories untold, uncover inflection points in our history, help us understand where we've come from so that we can know where we want to go. I think typography touches so many different areas of our lives. Rod's going to show a little bit of what the archives are going to start with, but this is also a huge user-generated experience. You know, I will say that when he first showed me some of the work that you're about to see is when it really clicked. I started to get why this archives and why this initiative is so important. You know, the work is presented in the highest possible resolutions that we can display it and you can download. It's accompanied by really thorough artifact data that identifies, you know, typefaces, where it was published, who contributed. And then additionally, we're putting a lot of context into the story behind the work, which I think is where a lot of the fun bits come out of what you're about to see. In the end of this talk, Rod's going to touch on a few ways in which you can get involved and contribute. I think at a minimum for everybody who's on this call right now, and I can see there's 83 of us, if one person in here is not signed up on our website at canadiantypography.ca to get email updates, I'd ask that as a minimum after this, that's what you do. Because this is more than just, excuse the language, type porn. It's more than just a historical record. We're trying to create a space where all Canadians can learn, challenge, and contribute to what is our collective typographic story. With that, I'm going to hand it over to a mentor, somebody that has been an inspiration. And I would not be here talking to you if he didn't tell me many years ago that I was in the wrong path and I needed to change my ways. I will leave it at that and let Rod show you some of the exciting work that you're going to see in the Canadian Typography Archives.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Gosh, you should get this talk. Okay, I don't. Oh, this project has been over 4 years in the making, but 4 years of involvement with some good, really good people, trying to figure out how we're doing this. It's been you can imagine the logistical nightmare. And it is going to be a logistical nightmare for some time to come. I'm sort of digressing very briefly, but I thought we had one part of it was sort of completely settled. And yesterday I got a phone call from somebody that I hadn't seen for over 25 years and just gave me some information that we did some very quick rewriting this morning. And I think that's also part of what this is about. We're just, this. We speak about the CTA now as if it's it's incomplete, and will be incomplete, for as long as we can imagine. So what I'd like to do tonight, and I'm going to be just a bit pressed for time because I think you, as you can imagine, there's an enormous amount of material. I'd like to just show you some of it, just a few pieces. It really, and I feel bad about this, but it's like, okay, there's not much, that I can do in within the time we have. But I hope I can give you a sense of where we're at and what we're doing. So I'm just going to turn that presentation on and just keep going. Okay, now is that, can you see that? That's,
Yes, you're good, Rod.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, the first thing that really has to be said, and I've kind of put it off in a box of its own. One of the things we learned early on is we have to limit this. And that's more for our own sake than anything else. So what I'm showing you tonight and what we're working on, and for the foreseeable future, is what we're calling phase one, which deals with between the years 1751 and 1985. They're not arbitrary years. 1751 was the introduction of the first printing press in Canada in Halifax. And 1985 is pretty much the beginning of the modern digital era, and in terms of typography and design, specifically PostScript and everything around PostScript. And that was a good endpoint for us. We don't know when phase two is going to begin. As you can imagine, there's a lot of rumbling, and I think it will be sooner. And I don't know how far I will be involved in that part of it. I'm pretty busy with this one, and this is going to keep a few of us going for some years to come. What you're seeing is we had our lead designer, Karen Watkins, had talked about a type quilt, which was such a wonderful idea. So I'm trying a type quilt. It's not as good as she would have done, but I think it suffices. I was actually going to use this as a graphic, and then I thought there's a couple of things I would like to point out. And one of them is, beside the Alcuin Society logo is a type book, the Cooper and Beattie type book. The brown one with the incredible embossing. That's the first Cooper and Beattie specimen book, and it's quite a production. It was produced. It came out in 1927. The company had started actually in 1921, but had reorganized in 27, and Ed Cooper and Lou Beattie became sole owners, and that really is when the company, as we all knew it, began. And one of the things that really I'd known for many years that Cooper and Beattie were, an incredibly important firm in Canadian typography. I had no idea how much, and they were kind of in the mainstay. And I would go so far as to say that what we know of, what we think of today as Canadian typography, really almost began with Cooper and Beattie. And they kept it going, and they kept it going right to the digital era, and just somewhat past that. But by that time, the writing was on the wall for everyone. And they also produced an enormous amount of material, both educational and promotional. They were nonstop. And over time, they had some of the finest designers in the country. And they did some incredibly groundbreaking work. And it was consistent. I mean, it was like 70 years of top-notch work, over 70 years of top-notch work. And actually what's happened, one of the things that I've discovered is we could build a website just on Cooper and Beattie's material, and it would be a damn good website. The other piece in this little quilt that I'd like to point out is directly above it is the first issue of the Devil's Artisan, 1980, and that was a little journal started by Glenn Galuska, Will Reuter, and Paul Farage. Farage dropped out some years later, and Glenn and Will kept it going, and then they sold it. They eventually sold it to Tim Inkster, who runs it today, and this is, to my mind, not well known enough. So we've got over 40 years of issues now dealing with Canadian typography, Canadian design, Canadian printing, fine press. Basically, it's a treasure trove. It's absolutely an incredible treasure trove. And I'd like to make that, more people aware of that. So as long as it's clearly understood, and I've had a lot of trouble with this, that we are dealing with phase one. So let's have a look at how we've set this thing up. We've got these basic categories. These are not necessarily arbitrary. They're all the main users of typography, and obviously advertising and promotion. This is how we're cataloging and categorizing material. So advertising and promotion, which at the moment, and I think probably for some time, it's going to be a huge one, because advertising, is massive. We also have designers, typographers, and letter artists. So these are the practitioners, the people that actually produce material, and this includes calligraphers, anybody, sign painters, whoever is a qualified practitioner. Early printing and type for us really is from 1751 to 1900, roughly thereabouts. After 1900, things do change considerably. And we don't have a lot, but we do have some. And obviously, the further back you go, the less we're going to have. Then we have graphic design and branding, which is another actually quite large area. Private and small presses, of which Canada has been singularly blessed with some of the finest, I think, some of the finest private and today small presses. I'm thinking of, places like Coach House, Stan Bevington and Coach House Press in Toronto, which is, incredibly important in Canadian history. Tim Inkster with Porcupine's Quill, which is about publishing the DA and producing some wonderful books. And of course, Gaspereau Press here in Nova Scotia, which I think is, is just a remarkable place, producing some of the finest material. And these aren't, they're well known in some circles, but some of these people are incredible designers as well, and incredible typographers. So publications would be, standard editorial books, magazines, anything within that range. Signage and wayfinding. This is the only thing that this is the only category at this moment we don't have anything to show. When I first put this together, and this is also very important for me because I started out as a sign painter, but I was thinking of things like Vancouver neon, because I grew up on the West Coast, so I know Vancouver neon, but I'm also thinking of things in my mind. I'm also thinking of companies like the Markle brothers in Toronto, who basically changed the face of downtown Toronto with a lot of their signage, particularly for those a little older, Sam the Record Man, and that kind of material. We have some great stuff. Trade and craft is a bit unusual, but it's anything pertaining to the trade and craft of typesetting. So whether it's everything from proofreading to how they produced the type, how a shop ran, what they had to do to get a job done, all of that material. And we have a great deal of material to fill that one. And then, of course, typeface design, which in phase one is going to, well, actually, that's expanding rapidly too. I was going to say there aren't going to be that many faces in pre-1985, but there'll be enough, and there'll be some surprises as well. Certainly, I'm being surprised now almost on a daily basis. We're also categorizing things by date. We're trying to make that front and center if we can, and we're really handling and showing three different kinds of media. The most common that we're handling are print artifacts, so they're ads, books, magazines, anything like that, really with good scans and the kind of thing like you're seeing to the left. We also have written articles, long form written articles, which is really interesting. And you'll see an excerpt from one of them in a couple of slides. And then we have audio-visual. We have visual, we have a couple of films. But I know from my own experience that there are audio tapes, for instance, of Carl Dare. There's audio tapes available of Alan Fleming. There's a lot of this material that is basically kind of locked away, and we'd like to have a home. We'd like to be the home for some of that material. I want to also just go switch over to the left-hand side to the quilt again. And I built up a little story yesterday. And it starts in the upper left with Carl Dare's design with type. That's the one with the black squares is the one that I think is everyone knows is the 1967 edition that has become one of the most widely available type books in the world, still in print 55 years later. Although unfortunately it's now print on demand. But at least it's still in print. To the right is the first edition that was produced that came out in 1952. And again, heavily cropped, but it's quite a difference. And it's also quite instructive to me. I've always thought that there's a 15-year difference in there, and Carl traveled quite a distance in that 15 years, judging by those two designs. Below the second edition, there's a book called Karsh and Fisher, Canada, See Canada. And this was a very important book that was published in 1960. And Joseph Karsh and John Fisher, the photographer Joseph Karsh and the writer John Fisher traveled throughout Canada, and the typical sort of small format coffee book. And Carl Dare designed the book. And it's a very tame production today by today's standards, but it's also quite instructive. It's also one of the things that was interesting was Carl got to sign the book. He signed his design on the back cover, which was highly unusual. But what's interesting is one of the things that we were able to obtain was that photograph of the woman and Joseph Karsh. And that's heavily cropped, but the woman is really important to me because that's Edith Dare, Carl Dare's wife. And Carl, by the way, is off sitting in the photograph. He's off quite far off to the left. He's about where, the H in Fisher is. And watching Edith and Joseph Karsh heavily in discussion. Now, we couldn't identify that photograph, but then I started looking at it and I thought, well, it was in a bookstore. We knew it was around that 1958, 60. Edith was wearing a hat, gloves, and pearl necklace. And so I went, oh my God, that's actually a photograph taken at the launch of that book. So we're trying to bring some of this material in as well. We do have other things similar to that that we're adding, because these are the things that I think bring background and depth and a different perspective on things. And yes, there's design and typography and there's stories here, but there's also the people. And for us, the people are really important. And witness that lovely Anna Pryor's lovely photograph of Jim Rimmer, which still affects me quite strongly. Just, looking over his glasses at everybody. There is also, and just above Jim and to the right of Karsh is the Cape Dorset calendar from 1977. That's actually the first calendar that was produced in the Cape Dorset Typographic Workshop when Will Hudson went up. and it's a absolutely stunning production. I think when we've got the scans ready, and and I don't know when we'll be posting it, but when we do, I think people will be shocked. We've got a line on a few more, so that's also part of the mix for us. So let's have a look at some of the items we've got. And as I say, this is just I've had to do a very quick, brief overview of everything. So under early printing and under the classification early printing and type, we have the Lovell Gibson type specimen book from 1847. What we have, and what everyone has, of course, actually, is the 1975 reprint that was done in Toronto by the Bibliographical Society of Canada. And it's one of the first, it still may actually be the first real type specimen book. In Canada, the Montreal Type Foundry, a couple of years earlier, had produced what they called a specimen book, but it wasn't actually bound. So I don't know, those kind of technicalities get in there, but this is one of the earliest ones. And it was quite a production, and it's at 106 pages. It's a substantial book. Remembering that at that time, it was, most printers, when they produced a type specimen sheet, they could put it on one sheet. They could put all their typefaces on one sheet. So this is quite a production. That piece on the left is a fold-out, and there were a number of fold-outs in this book. The book itself was modeled on the English, 19th century English type founder books, and especially when you look at that large Toronto and Montreal. If you've ever seen any of those English books, specimen books from that period, they were done exactly the same way. When I was young, younger, and I first saw this book, and I had a very funny reaction to it. It was one I wasn't expecting, because I looked at it and I got a little excited, because I went, oh my God, they're mentioning Canadian cities and Canadian companies, and I realized, and so that's oh my God, that's at least. Well, I first saw it. It wasn't long after 1975. So, I hadn't actually consciously realized that I was actually kind of looking for that, I guess, or at least one part of me was. This book was also published. It was printed in black, red, and gold ink. So these guys went all out. They also, by the way, Lovell and Gibson also had a shop in Toronto for a short while, but it didn't last. So it's a wonderful. It's interestingly enough, this is funny now. For years it sat on my shelf almost as a curiosity, and I'd get out and look at it, and take it out and look at it and go, oh, well, that's nice, all that kind of thing. It actually sits on my desk because I'm now using it almost every day, which I think is kind of bizarre. I want you, before I move on, I want you to just take notice of the typeface that Lovell and Gibson's is set in that ornate fold-out piece. Just grab that typeface in your mind, because there it is again. Almost, not quite. It's the same basic shape, only here it's actually had a decorative element engraved on the face of the type, and which is something that was really, that they did. I don't know where this typeface came from, but I'm still looking into that. It's been hard to find information on that one. It's multitude of names and slight variations of things. This newspaper This comes from an article that Linda Kincaid wrote for us on early printing and type in Canada from 1752 to 1900. She kind of set that bar for us, and she's covered the presses and that were installed across Canada between in that period, and there's quite a number of them. But so I pulled this one out because I thought it was particularly interesting, and both in terms of the background story. The first Black-owned newspaper in Canada, former slaves. I mean, wow. But also, what attracted me about it was really well done. It's really well done. I don't know if Henry Bibb did actually set the type himself, or whether he had a compositor in the office. But somebody knew what they were doing. And because that's so many of the newspapers from that period and certainly earlier, they were a mixed bag of quality. But this one was really well done. And by the way, we have rights to we have written and we've got rights to all of this material that we're showing. In this case, it came off Google, and Linda got rights. Actually, thanks to COVID, she was able. She got some scans at a reduced rate because she waited and waited, and she waited over a year in one case, and they felt so bad. They said, "Well, we'll give it to you, at a reduced rate." So all we had to do was wait, and that was nice. But we got good scans, so that's also very, very, very pleasant. This is one of those. Now here I've at the bottom, I put the CTA would like to learn about the life and work of other early typesetters and printers, including those whose voices may not have been heard before. This is part of our mandate, is if we don't know, and if we don't feel we know enough, or we think we're missing material or whatever, and this actually holds true for everything, please contact us, let us know. We're not the experts on this. We're trying to learn too. And we're hoping that as time goes on, that more people will get involved. More people will say, "Hey, that's something. I think the CTA could use that." Or somebody sees something and says, "Oh, wow, that I happen to know that date's incorrect." We want to know. We really do want to know. And as I said, that's what happened yesterday. And I was very pleased. I was really excited. So please, for whatever you see on any of our, whether it's Instagram or on the site, please, if you see something that's, you think is wrong, help us out. This is an interesting one. Just under publications, 1913, the Shaw Correspondence School in Toronto. And this was, correspondence courses were everywhere. You could, I think you could, short of brain surgery, you could take a correspondence course for almost anything, probably for brain surgery too. But this one was on lettering. What was interesting about this one is that the instructor is J.E.H. McDonald, who would go on to become one of the founders of the Group of Seven. And he did. He worked at Shaw for 15 years, and he wrote this booklet. He did, as far as we know, he did all the illustrations, or at least handled them all and worked on them. And the way these correspondence courses would work, you would sign up, you would get the booklet, and they would assign you an exercise. And the exercise might be, they would typically take something they had in the book, they also had instructions on, how you construct a letter and all that sort of stuff. But then once you got to actually do something, they would pick pieces in the illustrations, whether it was arrow collars or the auto car or something like that. And they would give you a word and say, letter that in that style, in that shape. And then you would send that into the school. McDonald would critique it. He would write suggestions and what have you, send it back to you, and you went on from there. And then at the end, I suppose you got a certificate or something that said you had graduated from this course. And it was a good way for people to learn, because at that time, of course, there were no schools to go to, because art colleges were art colleges, not design and lettering. If you want to know more about J.E.H. McDonald, the person that really championed him was Robert Stacy. And at the bottom, there's a book that I've given the book that he wrote, where he makes the argument that J.E.H. McDonald was the first designer in Canada. Bob was pretty adamant about that. He makes a good case, but I'm beginning to get to the point where I don't want to make those kind of hard and fast rules, because the day after tomorrow, somebody comes along with something and you have to change your mind. This is a personal piece for me. This is, but I thought it was interesting when we discovered this. This again is, under designers, typographers, and letter artists. In this case, it's a calligrapher, Irene Alexander. I never met her, but I knew of her for many years, and she was one of the leading calligraphers in Canada. And unfortunately, she died in 2015. But what I didn't know until a few years ago was that she did this word mark for Woodward's. Woodward's was a major department store in Vancouver when I was growing up. It was, and this word mark was everywhere. And I remember as a young man, I did wonder a couple of times. I thought, I wonder who did that, but it was everywhere. It was ubiquitous. It was on bags, it was on trucks, it was on signs, it was on neon signs, for God's sakes. It was everywhere, and it was throughout Western Canada. So I personally was thrilled to find out that who had lettered this, and that it was Irene Alexander. And it's atypical of her work because, as I say, she was really a calligrapher, but she must have been, she was really good. But she joined Woodward's in 1939 and quickly rose to become their head show card writer. So she knew what she was doing. And I'd like to know more about that period. So, and actually we're looking for, I'd like to find somebody that could take on Irene Alexander and find pieces of her work, and write about her life and her story, because she really was remarkable, and she did a lot. I know she did a great deal. Okay, this, under publications, this becomes a kind of turning point for things, in my mind. And this, between 46 and 56, Carl Dare produced a series of booklets for the E.B. Eddy Paper Company. These booklets had a real strong effect on Canadian design, not just typography, but Canadian design. Because immediately following the war, I mean, you can just imagine, there was thousands of men coming back from overseas. looking to, for jobs, looking for training. They were all young. Dare produced these booklets. You could teach typography today with these 5 booklets, and outside of a few digital tricks, the basics are in those 5 books, and they were popular. E.B. Eddy knew they had a good thing. They publicized in their advertising. They said, please order these books for use. The books were, for those of you sort of born and raised in the digital era, paper companies had a vested interest, obviously, in type, because everything was printed. If you were a designer, you were working in print. You weren't doing anything else. So everything, the paper companies, it was in their best interest. And each of these booklets is on different stocks throughout. And Dare employed a number of tricks inside to show how type reacts with different papers, but he also covers all the basics of typography, and they're really quite remarkable. The Type Talks, the third one, was also the largest. That was 24 pages, and that actually was. Dare had been already writing columns for a Canadian printer and publisher called Type Talks, and I'm assuming that E.B. Eddy approached him and said, "Look, would you like to do a series of booklets?" Dare was a kind of largely self-taught. He did go to art school, but he was really basically self-taught in a lot of this. But he was also a born educator. Dare never strayed very far from education, and even in the early '60s, when West Vaco Pulp and Paper Company in the States approached him and asked him if he would take over West Vaco Inspirations from Bradbury Thompson, Dare basically reproduced these in a more modern form and updated examples and things. And we have all the West Vaco Inspirations as well. I'd like to, I don't think we're going to be able to do it right away, but I think we can, it's not that far away where we'll be able to put these on the site as flip books. So we can actually scan all the pages because they're that important. I think they should be seen that way, because these are the booklets that educated Canadian designers for quite some time, In addition, so this is trade and craft, and in addition to just showing design, we're also looking for material, how things happened. And this, for me, is one of the singular important documents, basically, in Canadian typography. It's a letter from Carl Dare to Jack Trevette in Toronto. Jack Trevette had just bought Cooper and Beattie in 1950. And obviously Jack had written to Carl and made him an offer. And from the sounds of it, it was, an offer too good to refuse. And Carl wrote him back and said, okay, it's we need to discuss the details how C&B can use me most effectively. Because for many years, it was a puzzle for some of us. It was like Dare had a studio in Montreal with the illustrator Henry Evelet. And Evelet was a remarkable man in his own right, and they had a very successful studio. They had good clients. Wasn't a large roster of clients, but they were really good. E.B. Eddy was one of their clients. Their work was winning awards. They were kind of hot. And the credit actually in this case is Jack Trevett, and Trevett was a businessman. He was a typographer actually, and he was a type director for many years in the 20s and 30s, well, actually up to 1950. But he was obviously more of a businessman than anything, because when he got the chance to buy Cooper and Beattie, he jumped at it, and then he started hiring the best people he could get his hands on. And I think Carl was the first person, and Carl by that time was already considered the dean of Canadian typographers. So I think Trevett just went to him and just wrote him and said, look, what do you want? What, I've got this playground. It's called Cooper and Beattie. What would you like to do? And Carl never worked he was never an employee of Cooper and Beattie. He moved to Toronto, built a house in Richville and Richmond Hill, and Cooper and Beattie was one of his major clients, and they started a transformation of both Cooper and Beattie and Toronto. Then that one of the first steps in that transformation was in 1950, just really shortly after he got there. They started a series of what they called the typographic workshops, which were held on Saturday mornings. And they were ostensibly supposed to be an invitation only for art directors and designers in the city. But Dare got a letter from a young guy who said, I don't quite fit the qualifications, but I'm wondering if you would, could see your way to let me attend the workshop. And Dare said yes. And the young man was Alan Fleming. We're going to see a little bit more about Alan in a minute. So these were groundbreaking workshops. And it was interesting when I said at the beginning, looking at the 1927 Cooper and Beattie specimen book, that they were in the forefront. They had actually been doing this. Ed Cooper and Lou Beattie had been doing this right from the beginning. They were the only shop really that published real educational material for art directors and designers and printers. And they kept that up. They kept it up during the 30s. They kept it up during the war, not as much, but they kept it going. And Trevett, who had been working for Cooper and Beattie for many years, really took that to heart, and they never let it go. They didn't start to deviate from that till the late 60s. Mid to late 60s. But this one little piece of paper with handwritten in Dare's handwritten italic solved a big problem for a lot of us. It was like, okay, this was the confirmation that Trevett had been involved in this. So now we come to Alan Fleming, who, 6 years later becomes the type director of Cooper and Beattie. And Alan was 29 when he produced this ad. This was May the 2nd, 1958. And it's a very unusual ad for a type shop. This was not the way type shops advertised. This was a completely different approach, and it was a full-page ad for Marketing Magazine. And what became apparent was that when you see the progression, the historic progression of Cooper and Beattie, this is kind of the ground zero ad. This is the one and they actually spell it out remarkably, where they're saying imagination is our third partner. And this is the transition, the period when everything is transiting from metal to phototype. Dare had been producing ads for photo typesetting at Cooper and Beattie in '53. So they were fairly well along, although the metal was still going to stay in for quite some time, but they were really moving towards photo typesetting. But they were also moving in a different direction, and this is part of Trevet's his management and what he was after. Trevet wanted to turn Cooper and Beattie into more than just a type shop. And he succeeded, actually, because they turned it into a graphic design firm, a pretty damn good one, and not a bad size. And the number of people and the caliber of people who went through that design studio in Cooper and Beattie is just remarkable. Beginning, of course, with Carl Dare, but then under Alan Fleming, it really took off, and they started going after more than just typesetting. It was really a business venture for Trevet in many respects, because boy, you start doing some design work and you get to typesetting, you're going to do okay. And in a year or two later, when Fleming designed the CN logo, a lot of people don't know this, but Alan was still type director at Cooper and Beattie when he designed the CN logo, and he got a leave of absence to do that job. And one of the reasons he got a leave of absence, of course, was that Trevet was really interested in getting a chunk of that typesetting. They got some, but I don't think they got as much as he would have liked. So this one ad really does signal some things, but this was a hard one. This was a hard one for me to pick when I was putting this together, and I thought I needed an Alan Fleming Cooper and Beattie piece. He did some incredibly beautiful things, to my mind, more beautiful than this, but this is the one that was a significant ad. This was the one this was the shot across the bow that said, okay, no more Mr. Nice Guy. We're going to do it all. And they did. They actually did until the mid 60s. When there was quite a confrontation in Toronto, and Trevet did sort of back down and say, okay, we'll go back to being a type shop. But they did some glorious work. This piece I love, but I mean, I'm a Willem Sandberg fan from a long time now. I just love his work. He didn't come to Toronto, but Frank Davies, Frank is the only original member of the Toronto Society of Typographic Designers of Canada, which became the GDC, which is today DESCAN. He's the only one still alive. I hope. I haven't heard anything. And he produced this and did the talk on Sandberg in 1962, and it was a self-mailer, it's a wonderful piece of design, and beautifully produced. But one of the things that I liked, what I found the most fascinating, was the way he signed it. He just used his initials, and it's hard to make out, but you can see it's an FD, and he just used the counter shapes of the letters, which was one of the things that Sandberg, of course, was famous for. Sandberg, was forever doing pieces using the counter shapes, just the negative shapes of the letter forms. So, and I thought, what it was just buried in the corner, and I thought that was just a delightful touch. And I just, on a personal note, that this was held at the Park Plaza Hotel in Toronto. Which basically, for those of you who know Toronto is Avenue Road and Bloor, and it was sort of like one of the places. And I remember, I don't know how long ago, it was probably 20 or more years ago. I got a call from Stan Bevington at Coach House, and telling me, he said, you missed a great night. He said, we all went to the Park Plaza. It was just like the good old days. And I thought, yes, of course, because that's where you could find all the designers in Canada, probably more often than you should. They were all at the Park Plaza. This guy, Elliott, is one of my own personal heroes, because in my early career in Toronto, I was a lettering artist, and you can imagine trying to be a lettering artist in a city that has someone like Elliott. It was, every time he did something, I'd wonder why I was even bothering. And I'm very fortunate. I've got 3 of these pieces, the Cockney Slang, Sensual Faces, and Entertainer Magazine. I actually have the original artwork, which I found in a back room in Cooper and Beatty, 30 some years ago. They're just leaning against a wall, just ready to be thrown out. I met Al once, but it was pretty brief. And I don't know. I mean, there's saying somebody's the best at anything is a very iffy thing. But Al was, for me, he was always the best. And he was very old school at a time by the 70s, when a lot of work was being, lettering work was being done partly with cameras and partly with this and that. Al would have none of that. Everything was actually drawn on an illustration board and lettered in a brush or pen and ink. And I've seen its work, and it's it's the real McCoy, and it took. It takes so much skill to do that the times you just sort of your mouth just sort of drops open, because you go, my God, how did you do that? But he was really good, and he was really good at shaping. That National Ballet of Canada is just a perfect oval. It actually is. I once did this. I actually took the National Ballet of Canada and I dropped it I just dropped the scan into an InDesign file, and just ran a quick oval over it. I just wanted to see, and it was bang on. It was absolutely bang on. And Sensual Faces, the same thing. He was really good at handling those flourishes. He could make a word so that the words still came out. They always showed up. The flourishes never got in the way, but they were an integral part of the design. But they were always just secondary. The words were the most important part, and even Cockney slang, and that's an incredibly difficult piece to do, and he pulled it off. And as you can see in color, it also worked really well. But one of the things that about Elliott that was a little frightening for me was I went to find out information about him. Couldn't find anything. And this went on for a few years. We're just starting to get a break right now, but we could not find anything on this man. There was nothing. And I actually got quite frightened, because this was fairly early on in the project. And I thought, my God, this guy, I met this man. I knew him, and I knew his work. And I knew people that worked with him, and and I can't find anything. So it it put an added impetus for me on this whole project. So we're, as I say, we're just beginning to, and he also was the go-to guy, as I say, for a lot of the designers, and he did we've got a lot of his work. That's one of the things I'm very fortunate. We've got a lot of his work, and some of it I think will be quite a surprise. I see that I'm running late. Oh, surprise. So I'm going to have to pick this up a little bit. I'm so sorry. This is a neat story. This is actually the first Latin display face that we know of. And I'm starting to use these terms. This is 1964. This is Les Usherwood, who eventually went on, 4 years later to found Typesetters, the advertising typography shop. And this was an alphabet that he drew in his spare time and licensed to Headliners International in New York. And of course, after it was released, Hermann Zopp, Les had built his design on Melior. It was like a hand-lettered version of Melior, which was, by the way, was a very common thing for lettering artists to do. This is again part of going back to the categories thing. A lettering artist was not a type designer. They were completely different worlds. So lettering artists would look at typefaces, and often not quite with scorn, but usually a lettering artist would look at a typeface and say, "Oh, I can make that work better." So they would redo it, and as a lettering alphabet, these were never fonts; these were set by hand, so he did that. But Zopp actually filed a lawsuit accusing them of plagiarism. Now, the interesting thing is, from all accounts, I didn't have room here to say this, but Zopp wasn't really that concerned about the design. He knew the score. He knew that was the way things were done in those days. What Zopp was really upset about, and I don't blame him, is when Headliners wrote the advertising copy for Malure, the last line in the ad said, "Melior is old-fashioned, use Malure. It's a more contemporary typeface." So they not only, in Zopp's mind, they not only took his design, they said it was old-fashioned and out of date, and it wasn't at that time. So, and the only recourse he had was to file a lawsuit accusing them of plagiarism. We don't know how the lawsuit turned out, and that was because of COVID. Because when I went searching for the information, it's locked away in an archive in Switzerland apparently, and people couldn't get at it because of COVID. So I'm kind of waiting on that one, but because I think there's a few more surprises still left in that one. Design Collaborative was a design firm that was formed from 4 top-notch designers, multidisciplinary designers, Alfred Fox, Rolf Harder, Anthony Mann, and Ernst Rock. These guys are all well known. The one that interests me personally, and I'll sort of limit it now because I'm running out of time, is Tony Mann, who's the third one of the four designers, and interestingly enough, the one that's looking the other direction. And I think I have a suspicion this brochure, as Brian Donnelly says, was the simplicity of it, it belies the amount of experience and range of clients that these guys had. It was amazing. And Tony Mann was his transformation of Cooper and Beattie in '64 was just remarkable and actually ground shaking in Canadian design. But Tony was not, he wasn't that, he wasn't the businessman, let's put it that way. And within I think it was 3 or 4 years, he got an invitation from NASCAD, from Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, asking if he would come and set up a design division, and he jumped at it. And he made NASCAD for a number of years, was one of the leading design schools in North America, and that was largely Tony. This was just, I had to throw this in, obviously, for tonight. But this was Will Hudson, who was actually the reason why Jeff Spencer says Will Hudson was the reason why the Alcuin Society was formed in the first place. This was the first invitation that he produced, letterpress, of course, handset and letterpress. And I knew Will back then. He gave me this invitation, and I remember when the society formed, and I remember seeing a lot of this stuff was on press. I was 20-ish, sort of thing. And as I said, a sign painter at that time, so I was curious and interested, but I wasn't gonna get involved with type, that's for sure. But it was, and Will was an interesting man, and I'm not prepared to take him on as a subject for the CTA. I've got too many other irons in the fire, but we would like to have somebody who would, meet somebody who would say, hey, I knew him, or I know of him, I've got a lot of material, I know his story, blah, blah, blah. And who could champion this person. So please, anybody that can do that, please step forward. These are 3 ads that, and again, advertising and promotion. These were fairly groundbreaking ads at the time. 77 to 78, Ontario Foodland had just been formed. It was a new government organization, and this was the launch ad. And so the logo, of course, is in on the left-hand side, front and center, at midway, and large, client's delight. These were groundbreaking ads. It's hard to imagine today, but when they appeared, full-page newspaper ads in the Toronto Star. Boy, I remember actually when these ads came out, and it was not only that, it wasn't a new kind of busy, cluttered look, and a lot of stuff going on. Behind the scenes, there was also a big change in the way ad agencies were working with type shops, and in this case in Typesetter, because these ads were produced at Typesetter. They weren't produced in the agency. The agency was designing them and everything, and writing the copy and all of that, but basically it was all being done at Typesetter. And in fact, actually, Albert Macusi, who had these 3 ads, he also did the assembly on them all. So I've talked to Albert a great deal about these ads, and we've got a lot of other Typesetter material. But this was the only I only had room for one, and so we thought we'd start with these. But again, it's part of that mix. And this is a crazy little thing, but the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms was typeset at Montalino, and basically because Montalino, everyone thought Montalino had the exclusive rights to Cartier, to Carl Dares Cartier, but by 82, the rights had they only had them for 1 year. when it was launched in 1967. They kind of did have the rights in the sense that you had to have a linotype, some linotype system to linofilm or VIP or one of those. So it was limited usage. But I used to look at the settings on these every morning when I came into work and just take a look at so in a way, my version of Cartier book that was done quite a few years later because I couldn't find time to do it. That stemmed really kind of, I had been working on Cartier before 1982, but this particular project in the shop kind of got me going more than anything else. But what I thought would be interesting for people was that the heading itself, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, wasn't set on a machine. It was set using film positive letters set on glass plates. And you see on that glass plate, there's lines running across the top and the bottom, and then the guy's putting the letters down. That's double-sided tape that's adhered to the glass, and that's what's holding those letters in place. And then those glass plates, once all the words were set, they went into the camera department. They were backlit and shot, and film or paper came out, and we assembled that into the finished headline. And that was a system that was developed in the late 30s. And was a mainstay for advertising headlines, up till 82. By 82, it was, we were still using that for headline settings, mostly for scripts and things like that. And it was wonderful for that. But it was already becoming, kind of archaic. I looked at that date when I was putting this together, and I thought, my God, we were still doing that in 1982. But we were, a lot of it. And I said we had some films. We're starting with these. The first one is the video that Carl Dare shot in 1956 when he went to Enschede to study type making under Paul Radish, the man at the top. Who was one of the last letter cutters in Europe. Carl took a 16mm camera, and he got the guys to he got Radish to cut a letter, that P that you can see they're putting it in the flame. They're about to make a smoke proof in the film. So they stick that letter, that punch that he's just cut, and they put it in the flame, and they get soot on the surface, and then they can print on white paper and get incredibly sharp prints. It's amazing. But Carl got them to do this, and they went right through. But it was a silent film, and by the time we got to it, which is some years ago, it was starting to deteriorate. So we were able to clean it up a bit, not as much as I would have liked, but we just didn't have the money. And I got Matthew Carter, a friend of mine, who also, he had studied exactly the same as Carl, just before Carl had arrived in Holland. So Matthew was actually the only person on the planet that could narrate this film, because he was the only person who had done it. And so he came to Toronto, and we went out to Sheridan, and he laid that voice track down, like right instantly, perfectly. It was really annoying to watch, actually. And then we got, Sheridan managed to clean that film up a bit. And we had also an interview with Carter on the making of metal types and everything. So we're going to have both the original and the version that we reworked a few years ago. And then we're just going to add more films as time goes on. We're sourcing different films now, and as I said, audio. So we're going to keep going. So we're winding up. I'm not going to dwell on this too long, unfortunately, but to say we could use a little help is a bit of an understatement. There are so many people across this country, and I apologize that this presentation tonight is so Toronto-centric, but I'm sorry, but the fact of the matter is we have an enormous amount of material just that was produced in Toronto itself. And we have to have it, of course. But what we're interested in, really interested in more than anything, is, so what was going on in Vancouver, what was going on in Calgary, Edmonton, Saskatoon, Regina, Winnipeg, Montreal. Oh, for God's sakes, Montreal. Right across the country, Halifax. I mean, all of these cities, all of these areas had good people, and there's a history. So, and what I'm sort of saying is if you're scanning through this list of names, and you may not know that many of them, but if you see one, you go, oh my God, that, and you think you can do something or point us in the right direction, we would love to hear from you, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. I just kind of threw names down as I was going, and please, if you can, if you know women who were involved in typography in Canada prior to 1985, please let us know. These are all very, we're after everybody in the country, not just a select few. This was the principal means of communication in this country. So the credits, I thought maybe originally I would be able to go through each one, but what I'm going to say instead is I only hope that each one of you at some time get the opportunity to work with as good a group of people that I've had the pleasure of, because I don't think that happens it certainly didn't happen very often in my life. This pretty amazing group, and we're looking to add to it, but and so again, that's part of the process. So thank you, and are things, and I think I better shut up.
Rod, thank you so much. I'm just going to bring myself up here. If you want to unsave the screen.
Okay.
If anyone has any questions for Rod, please put them in the Q&A. I'm also going to bring Sam up onto the as well. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. I think first, just a question on my end. In terms of contributing, is there, you had a contribution email that you sent?
Yep.
Kind of a formal, is there a format to which people need to follow once they reach out to you? This is both for Sam and yourself. Just
at the moment, you can write to contribute canadiantypography.ca or info@canadiantypography.ca. Either one, it's going to go to the same place anyways. And it can be anything, from hey, I've got information on so and so or whatever. or it can be, like, is there anything I can do to help? I would like to be involved in this. This is the first time we've actually, this is the first time we've talked outside of ourselves. So we're finally ready to say, okay, hey, we're here, folks. We live. We're we're alive. We're kicking, sort of, and we're going. We're moving ahead. The website is now under construction, and I'm loath to give a time, but it's April. We know that it'll be April, and it is underway. So I'm feeling for the first time, I'm feeling comfortable about that.
So it will be a solely virtual archive, or will there be, is there an idea of having physical holdings eventually?
Yeah, that's okay. It's going to be, yes, it will be virtual, because that's actually not a bad way to go. But the question has arisen on a number of occasions. What are we going to do with the actual physical pieces? And it is a good question. You can blame me, really, because I've deflected a lot of these questions over the last few years. And I've said, I'm sorry, until we have a website, I'm not talking about anything else. We'll get there. So actually, now that the now that the website is going to be up in a few months, I may have to apologize to people and say, okay, we should look at that. I don't know what we're going to do, to be honest. It's an awkward situation. We have spoken to people. Universities don't want archives. The university and colleges just don't want archives, period. They just don't want the expense of looking after them. It doesn't seem to matter what, so we, if anyone has a brilliant idea, we'd like to hear it. And
I don't have a brilliant idea.
We're not the only ones with material. Sorry, Sam.
No, I was going to say, I don't have a brilliant idea. I don't know if we've started our metaverse exploration yet, which is, I'm saying in jest, but there is a way to present this work that is both accessible and inclusive to everybody who wants to access it. And I think that part of the genius of what Rod and the board have put together is creating a space that is open for educators and for professionals to use and to benefit the most from, as well as just from those that are the history buffs among us who want to kind of understand how this is shaped and contributed to our society. I did also just want to mention, to get a sense of the level of detail that we're loving to get when we get contributions, there is a submissions form on our website that will kind of give you a sense of the level of detail that we really are trying to capture. So if someone does have something to contribute, I'd suggest, you can send us an email as well. You can go to the website and look at the form and then see what is there.
We do have a submissions form on that, which is one thing. Yeah.
In this process, as you've started to, talk to people, in and around Toronto, but also in the surrounding areas, are there some figures that weren't even on your radar that have surprised you?
Yes and no, in a way. I can speak personally. I had an example here, which is sad, actually, and also kind of, I guess, speaks to some of our immediate needs. I met a man. I had sort of known him, we had talked over the years here. His name was Ed Fung, and at the end of the summer, there was a group had met in downtown, And I found out that Ed had worked in Toronto. He had worked for Carl Brett. He had worked at different places in Toronto. And I said, man, I really need to talk to you. So we had sort of, we'd agreed we were going to talk. And last week I got an email saying Ed died. And I went, oh. And actually, to be honest, that's happened quite a bit to me. Last year I wondered why Robert Reed hadn't answered my email. That kind of thing that goes on, and that might just be me showing my age and going, oh God, but I think there are people, and I know there will be people across the country in different places, that are going to come out as surprises where we're going to go, oh my God, I would never, I didn't know that. And it's so, because I think it makes a big difference. I think it would make a big difference for a young person if they were in Regina and found that, oh, I didn't know these guys, oh, they did that, like, that was 25 years ago. Wow. That sort of thing. It's a small thing, but I think it would make a significant difference. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly a project that is, it's a vital project, and it's great that it's been able to launch, and that you're going to be opening up the site pretty soon. We'll be sure on our side to let people know once it's
yeah.
So very exciting. I think with that we'll probably wrap up for tonight. I want to mention to everyone who's attending that we will be making this talk available through our YouTube site. So we'll continue the conversation there. And both Sam and Rod have provided their email contacts through the message. And there are a couple of lists of names that you were mentioning that you're looking out for. Certainly we have a talk through the Alcuin Society done by Gary Sim that touches on some of the BC contingent. So probably someone to reach out to as well. He has an archive that he's been putting together online, which would, I think, tie in really nicely.
Yeah.
But for now, what we'll do is just to let you know that we will be doing an event in March, a virtual event. And this will be Nancy Jacoby, who for people in Toronto will know her through the Japanese paper place. And that will be Thursday, March 9th at 5 p.m. Pacific. We haven't made that public yet, but we will announce that through our Eventbrite page soon. But for now, Rod, Sam, thank you so much for taking the time to lay out the archive, and all the best in the future. I know there was good attendance here. There's an appetite for it, and it's more than important to get these specimens online and talk about the individuals that put these together. So thank you again. This is
thank
great.
you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All the best. Thank you very much, and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Take care.